This week, we're answering your questions and you're watching and listening to the Landscape Photography Podcast. So those of you that are audio subscribers to the podcast, you probably caught that you might be watching this as well. So I'm going to attempt, and we'll see how long I actually stick with this, but I'm going to attempt to record video along with audio for all of these podcast episodes. So those of you watching this on YouTube, you're listening to the Landscape Photography Podcast. This is available on iTunes and Spotify, all of those things. So if it's more convenient to listen to a podcast in the car, you can check it out over there. Those of you guys that actually are subscribers to the audio show, if you want to watch me on YouTube, you can do that as well. I'm going to try to record video along with all future episodes. We'll see how long I can stick with that. So why has it taken so long to get this episode out? Well, first of all, I got very busy with workshops. I was leading workshops in the Faroe Islands, had that trip to Scotland. I've been out and about and gone a lot, and it makes it really easy to fall behind in some of the other stuff that I do, like the podcast. But then I came back, and after, creating YouTube videos and leading workshops, I was just kind of sick of the sound of my own voice, if I'm being honest. I'm not somebody that's really overly confident or in love with the sound of my own voice, and it tends to make recording some of these a little bit more challenging because I'm just kind of tired of hearing myself sometimes. So for that reason, I've taken a break from the podcast, but I'm back, and hopefully we'll be consistent for here on out for at least a little bit. So let's jump into today's show, where I'm answering some of the questions that came in on the Facebook group. If you would like to partake in some of those questions, we have a Facebook group called the Landscape Photography Podcast, and that's where people offer images for critique, for the community to critique. I jump in on that as well, but we also, take a lot of suggestions from that Facebook group for directions for the show. So whether it's future guests, future topics, or questions to be answered on episodes like this, that's where all that stuff comes from. So if you'd like to partake in that, just join the Facebook group over there. All right, let's jump into it. First question is from Andre. He asks, where do you see your photography now as opposed to, say, 2 years ago? Has it evolved? What has changed in my style and approach, and where do I see myself in 2 years? So, I definitely feel like some of my growth has plateaued a little bit. 2 years ago, I was not as good as I am now, I don't think. But I will say that I haven't improved as much as I would like to say that I've improved in the last 2 years. I think 2 years ago, I was leading far less workshops, and I was able to shoot on my own and shoot for myself a lot more. That's the downside to leading workshops as often as somebody like me does, is that I very seldom get to just go out and shoot for myself. And that can be kind of a problem because, you're in a workshop environment. Ideally the participants come first and my photographs come second or third. And, that takes a toll after a while when that's the only type of shooting you ever get to do. So I haven't got to shoot as much as I would like to on my own. I still shoot a lot. Don't get me wrong. I shoot more than most people get to, the people that have day jobs and stuff. But I have not seen the growth in my own photography that I'd like to see. I feel like lately, especially in my post-processing, I'm getting almost too tasteful. 2 years ago, a lot of my edits were very heavy-handed. I had just learned all of these new techniques, and I was implementing them all on every photo. And that's not always the best technique. And so a lot of my work was just over-edited, honestly. And now I've been working on dialing that back for the last 2 years, trying to get more tasteful and more discreet with my editing. But now I'll find myself processing a photo for like 45 minutes. I get done, I look at the screen, I'm like, that almost looks straight out of camera. Like, did you do anything? What do you have to show for the last 45 minutes? So I feel like some of my most recent work lacks that dramatic pop that I would like it to have. I've been erring on the side of not heavy-handed enough editing, or not editing enough. That's what I'm struggling with currently. So in 2 years, I hope to be at a place where I'm striking that perfect balance where things are processed to a point of nice stylization and has that wow factor, but it's not straight up fantasy land. That's what I'm always striving for. Josiah asks, I'm interested to know how you've made a name locally versus online, or if I have a local focus. What slice of my business is local versus what is online? When I first became a full-time photographer, all of my photography work was local. I was shooting portraits and weddings and real estate, sports for the local newspaper. I was very much a generalist. And for that reason, my focus was very much local. So the marketing that I did was still just, social media, and it was word of mouth and networking with local people, but it was done with a local emphasis. So I was, finding a lot of local business owners through Facebook, or maybe just meeting them in person. I would do a shoot for one business owner, if we're talking real estate, and that would lead to the next, because if I did a good job for them, they'd recommend me to a friend. Nowadays, though, my things have changed dramatically for me as my YouTube channel grew, as my Instagram following has grown. I'm followed by a whole lot more just photographers rather than potential photography clients. The majority of the people that follow me are other photographers, and that has opened up the possibility for the educational side of things that I do, the workshops, the tutorials, that stuff. But none of that was ever a plan for me. Nothing that I've ever done with photography has been because I had this entrepreneurial spirit where I was going to go make a bunch of money and create a business. None of that came from wanting to make money. It all came from just wanting to be a good photographer. And as my photography skills grew, more people wanted to know what it was that I knew. It's just kind of evolved organically. And I think that's one of the best pieces of advice that I can give people is, focus on the photography aspect. Don't do things for the wrong reasons. Don't do things for money. Don't do things for the popularity aspect. Do it because you love doing it. And if you love doing it enough and you get good enough at something, people are going to acknowledge that, respect you for it, and opportunities will come because of it. Braden asks, how do you adjust to different conditions when you're committed to a time and a spot? Say you're on a vacation or something. So harsh light during the middle of the day, overcast days. What do you do in those less than optimal shooting conditions? Well, I've talked about this a lot, especially on my YouTube channel, where, when the light sucks, it changes how you have to approach a scene. You can't just go in with a preconceived notion of, I'm going to get the big wide landscape. But if you try doing that on a big cloudless day in the middle of the afternoon, you're not going to get a good photo from it. So I change what I shoot based on light conditions. So if we are greeted with that cloudless day, which unfortunately happens pretty often, I start thinking about what is going to look good with that harsh contrast that you're going to have. Direct light equals harsh contrast, and sometimes you can use that contrast to your benefit. So I talk about shooting in forests a lot, and the nice part about that is that direct sunlight can really emphasize, certain objects or subjects in a forest scene, because you'll have a primarily dark forest, or a dark area in a forest with little beams or little splashes of light falling on foliage or tree trunks or whatever it is. Maybe you're backlighting everything with that direct light, and everything takes on that kind of backlit, glowy, atmospheric feel. You can use that stuff to your advantage. It takes a very chaotic scene and simplifies it, because you're letting the light dictate where you shoot. So the same is kind of true for when you have those overcast days. When you have an overcast day with a whole lot of cloud cover, you have to think of it in terms of you have a giant softbox in the sky. It kills that contrast. It makes everything very soft and evenly lit. Sometimes forest scenes can be way more difficult on an overcast day because you don't have the benefit of the light splashing on subjects and drawing attention to things. Everything is even, which means that you can shoot in any direction. You don't have direction limitations. You can compose shots in any direction. All of that contrast is either going to have to come from subject matter. So maybe you have a bright tree trunk in the middle of it surrounded by dark foliage, or it's going to have to come in post. So a lot of times overcast shots, they're a little bit more fun to post-process because you have far more control over where that contrast and where those highlights are going to fall based on how you dodge and burn that scene. If we're talking outside of a forest scene, a lot of times if I have that overcast sky, that's going to lend itself much better to kind of more of those little vignettes. You have to change what it is that you shoot. Take a telephoto lens and shoot little vignettes of the scene rather than the big grand landscape. Focus on the little things that make that area different. Maybe it's interesting rock formations. Maybe, it's a macro shot of the tiny pebbles on a beach, whatever it happens to be. Also, there is something to be said for when you do have those overcast skies. Sometimes you have to envision what that cloudy sky is going to look like if it's 2 stops darker with a whole bunch of contrast added to it. Sometimes the texture that is in that sky can really lend itself well to post-processing. So I'm always kind of envisioning how I might post-process something like that as well. Chris asks, best way to improve as a beginner? Do you join a club, get out and practice a lot? And how do you know what needs to improve? I've never been really a big fan of photo clubs and stuff. And I think the reason for that is that they kind of just, they almost breed competitive. I don't know. There's this competitive thing going on in photo clubs. While, sometimes that's cool, I think it's not nearly as beneficial or constructive as it could be. For me, my biggest recommendation for getting better quickly is you have to shoot a lot, just have a lot of familiarity with your camera. The more you go out and shoot, the better you're going to get, the faster you're going to get better. But finding a small group of friends, or maybe it's just 1 or 2 friends to go out and shoot with pretty often, is such a big deal. Especially if you can find somebody that's more experienced and better than you are to go out and shoot with. There's so much that you can learn from other photographers. And there's that whole aspect of, you kind of feed off of each other. Like nobody wants to be the lame one that doesn't get up for sunrise. So everybody gets up and you get out and shoot. And a lot of times you're just more fruitful and you try a little harder when you go out with a group of friends. It's more fun. And you have those other people to bounce ideas off of. You post-process an image, send it to them, and they're like, what are you doing? Well, your colors are all wrong. And then you can fix things. So find a small group of friends and just go out and shoot with each other, bounce photos off each other for critique. That's one of the best things you can do when you're first starting. Scott asks, did the move to Sony allow me to make better photographs? Did it make me a better photographer than when I was with Canon? Not really. I mean, cameras are tools. And granted, I feel like I have better tools available to me now, but I don't think that I'm a better photographer or making better images since I've switched to Sony. Granted, I have higher resolution images. I can print them larger. And it's changed the way I've shot a lot. By having a sensor with far more dynamic range, it means that a lot of times I don't have to bracket like I used to have to bracket. A lot of times I can just expose for the highlights in the scene. And even if the left side of my histogram goes a little ways off the edge of the histogram, I know that I've got enough latitude to be able to recover those shadows, which means I don't have to bracket as much, which means that the post-processing part is easier. Having said that, though, it's kind of a crutch that you can get into where knowing that you have that latitude can kind of make you lazy. And I feel like I've gotten a little bit lazy with my bracketing and exposure blending and stuff, just because that you can make a passable image by just exposing for the highlights, even though you'd get a little bit higher quality image by still continuing to bracket, expose to the right, and then use that brighter exposure for your shadow areas. That's the best case scenario, but sometimes I get a little bit lazy. Where it has made the biggest difference, and honestly is one of the biggest factors in me switching over to Sony, was the video quality. You know, the more YouTube content that I create, the bigger the deal the video aspect is. And it's nice now that I've switched to Sony. I carry with me 2 bodies. They're both full frame. They both take the same batteries, same lenses, and they're both excellent video cameras. So it doesn't matter what I'm shooting with one camera, I can be filming myself do it with the other. That's not something I could really do with Canon. I'm not going to be holding a 5D Mark IV out in front of me and trying to vlog with it. It'd break my arm, but it's really easy to do with the Sony cameras. Scott asks, are you using your rooftop tent much these days, and do you have any new vehicle plans? So those of you that don't know this, I have a James Burroud rooftop tent, which is one of the hard shell tents. They're really, really cool because essentially anywhere that you can park, you can essentially camp. So you don't need, you know, a nice smooth place to lay down a tent. It can be snowy or muddy or just terrible weather, and it totally doesn't bother you because you're up off the ground on top of your car. Also, if you're nervous or worried about predators or animals or snakes or bugs or whatever, it's really nice to be up off the ground on top of your car. They are very expensive. There's a huge sticker shock to them. I think mine was like $3,700, which when you hear that, it just sounds like a ridiculous amount, but it's a tent that's going to last for, you know, years and years and years. And one of the cooler parts of it is, as a photographer, I can set up my campsite, quote unquote. I can set up my tent in about 30 seconds. I can tear it down in about 2 minutes. When I went to Scotland, I tested out the whole van life thing. I rented from Outdoorsy a Volkswagen, a Volkswagen conversion van of some kind. And I found that to be so much more convenient than a rooftop tent. Simply because, you know, sometimes during sunrise, you don't want to roll out of bed and then have to collapse, you know, tear down your tent so you can drive to a sunrise shoot. What's nice is in a van, you can roll out of bed, hop in the front seat, and drive off. And that's really, really convenient, really nice. It's also nice because when it gets cold out, you have a heater. You know, you can stay warm during the winter months. You have a sink and you have a stove and you can, you know, make your breakfast all right there. I got kind of used to it and kind of spoiled by the van life thing. So I can envision myself doing some kind of van conversion, but the problem is I don't know what I would want to convert, because I would want 4-wheel drive, but I don't want one of those giant Mercedes Sprinter vans. Those things are ridiculously tall. So I'm not sure what I would do it based off of, but I could foresee myself doing a van conversion. David asks, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the landscape photography workshop scene. There are a ton of guys out there doing this, and it's very hard to tell the difference between a photo safari and a legitimate teaching workshop. Where do I fit in that scale, and how do I feel about the various formats of workshops offered versus getting a client to just a great location versus actually teaching them something? This is a really important question nowadays, I think, just because there are, like David mentions, there are so many workshops going on. First of all, one of the reasons that this is a thing is that you have many, many amazing photographers out there. And if you are an amazing photographer with a large social media following, you could easily sell out a workshop. Doesn't mean that you should be doing workshops, however. Some of the advice that I give people is that if you are thinking about going on a workshop with someone, that person that you're thinking about going on the workshop with should have an example of their teaching style somewhere in video form on the internet somewhere. Between YouTube and people that sell tutorials, most people that are interested in education have an example of their teaching style somewhere on the internet. And if they don't, that's kind of a red flag, because if you're interested in education, you should have examples of you educating, right? So I highly recommend that you do a little bit of background, investigation before you invest in a workshop. And another thing is that you want to make sure that you're going on workshops with people that you not only like their photography, but you can it feels like somebody that you could relate to, or somebody that you would want to spend a week of your time with. not everybody is going to resonate well with somebody like me that's a little bit more laid back and unprofessional. And that person might be better served going on a workshop with somebody that is very professor-like, very highly organized, none of this frivolous nonsense, and everybody has a different learning style, and you need to find somebody that is going to offer a teaching style to complement that. And it shouldn't be difficult because literally there's thousands of workshops being led by different people. So just make sure that the people that you are going on a workshop with are people that have examples of them actually teaching somewhere in video form, and make sure that, it's somebody that you not only respect their work, but you respect or you like the way that they present information. So that's what I recommend to people. Janik asks, I personally haven't sold any artwork in the past few years, and I would love any tips and ideas on creating new sales. I know it's a bit of a boring question, but I'm sure others would like to hear the answer to this. So first of all, I've done an episode in the past with Ryan Smith. If you haven't heard that one, check that out, because Ryan makes a killing off print sales, and he knows what he's talking about, and he can probably make some better points than I'm about to make, but check that out if you haven't already. So some of the things that I would highly recommend is, first of all, get your work, your physical printed work in a physical place in front of people with their physical eyes. There's nothing that competes with actually seeing a print in person. Don't just try to sell your artwork online on your website. Everybody is doing that, and it's really hard to make any kind of impact in a online type situation. So try to print it physically, get it in a physical place. The other thing is try to make those prints as big and impactful as you can afford to make them. So print them on a really nice print medium. Maybe it's acrylic, maybe it's a really large metal print. And also print them as large as you can afford to. So, a giant, 60-inch print is going to have far more impact than a little 24-inch one. Just because a buyer might not be able to afford that big one that's on the wall, it's still going to have that initial impact, that initial wow factor, and they're going to end up staring at your photo longer, which, increases the opportunity for making a sale. Also, make sure that you're putting them in a place where people are going expecting to spend money. A lot of restaurants will allow photographers to hang their work up on the walls for free. I've never sold a print that way, or I've sold very few prints that way. But if you can put a print up in a place, say like a winery, where people are going to spend a fair bit of money, or maybe it's like a local art fair or something like that. If you can set up a booth like that, people are going there with the intention of checking out art and probably spending money on it. You're far more likely to make a sale in that kind of environment than you would be at like a restaurant or something. So those are some of my biggest tips. Also, make sure that whatever you're printing is kind of unique to you. What I mean by that is, if I was to just make a print of every iconic place that I've been to, all my Mesa Arches and Horseshoe Bend images or whatever, my photography is not going to stand out from the next guy's. Everybody is printing those type of images. So what I think that people should do is print work that is very specific to them. So like, for example, if somebody thinks about me, they might be thinking of seascapes or wave images or something like that. So I would print out some of my best portfolio work of that type of imagery. And that way it makes my stuff separate and different from somebody that might be set up next to me or whatever. So make sure your stuff is unique to you, print it large and impactful, and get it physically in front of others. Dan asks, how do I stay inspired, stay fresh, and get out of the inspirational rut? I wish I had a great answer for that, because I'm kind of in one myself. My problem is that as somebody that does it full time, I feel very much pressured, not only because I have a YouTube channel and a podcast to be publishing to and all my social media stuff, but I also have to make a living. So I feel very pressured to be producing and creating all of the time and to think about one thing all the time. And I think that that's very much not a healthy thing for a human brain. We need diversity in order to remain excited and inspired by things. So one of my biggest pieces of advice is that you need to allow yourself to take a break from things. It doesn't matter what it is, what interest it is. You have to take a break from it at some point. You can't just think about it all day, every day for years on end and not get burnt out. You have to give yourself a break. So when you're not feeling super inspired, allow yourself to take that break. Erin Bobnick gave me one of the best pieces of advice. She says that when you're in a creative rut, you have to focus on input rather than output. And I try to take that to heart. And what she means by that is, when you're not feeling inspired to create, or when you're not loving what it is that you are creating, take a break from creating and just focus on, appreciating artwork of other kinds. Maybe it's, going to a concert and listening to music. Maybe it's watching tutorials and learning something new and focusing on just learning new skills. Maybe it's, just watching Game of Thrones and appreciating the color grading and the lighting that they have in the show. Focusing on, creative input and inspiration eventually will inspire you to start creating again. And you'll be more excited about the stuff that you are creating once you've allowed yourself to become re-inspired. Don't force yourself to create when you're feeling uninspired, because you're not going to like that work anyway. Okay, the last question is going to be from Brian Pex. He says, name 3 things or one thing that has dramatically improved your work. So I've probably focused on this, or I've emphasized it too much. Maybe it's not too much. Maybe it's just right. Post-processing is so important. And in my opinion, editing and post-processing is 50% of the creative process of photography. For example, you can have Joe Schmo and like Ryan Dyer or Michael Shainblum or insert amazing photographer here. And the thing that's going to separate them, even though they're shooting the same scene at the same time, 3 feet from each other, is the way that person on the right, non-Joe Schmo, Michael Shainblum or Ryan Dyer, is going to post-process that image. That's where all of the personality and all the mood and all the emotion and all the style and all the feeling is coming from. A camera is designed to capture data. That's literally what modern digital cameras are doing. They're just capturing data. A raw file is flat by definition. And what you need to do is you need to inject some of that style, that feeling, that mood back into the photo. And that comes from post-processing. This person over here is going to see a scene, even though they're standing next to each other, completely different than this person over here. Post-processing is also where we inject our brain filter back into the equation. Remember that we're seeing things through our brain filter. We're noticing some things. Our brain is filtering out the things that are not interesting to us, but our camera sees all, and it sees all equally. So when we post-process, we're really trying to emphasize the things that we liked and we noticed, and de-emphasize or downplay the things that we did not like and did not notice at the time. Post-processing is where all of that stuff comes from. It's also where the feeling and the mood comes from. So in my opinion, when I started to really improve at post-processing and really put more effort into getting better and getting more tasteful with post-processing, that's really where my photography started to take off. That was kind of the springboard that made me grow more quickly than, understanding the exposure triangle. Because you can have an amazing photographer that doesn't understand their settings, but is an amazing post-processor, though that photographer is probably going to outshoot or create more interesting work than the photographer that everything they shoot is straight out of camera, but they're amazing at their settings. Like there's lots of those people that are not good at post-processing, but understand the camera aspect. But it's the really amazing post-processors that their artwork stands out from the crowd oftentimes. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in this week. I hope you guys hold me to this. I'm going to attempt to record video for all or most episodes moving forward. We'll see how we do, but hopefully you guys have enjoyed this, and we'll see you in the next episode. Take it easy, everybody.